Stewart Daniel Begg, August 13th, 1947. Born in Cornwall, Ontario. I live in a place called Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, which is just outside of the city of Edmonton. Everybody called me Stu, and still to this day they call me Stu. Well, that's pretty much a loaded question. The reason why I say that is I started in Ontario, where I started playing lacrosse in Cornwall, and I started refereeing there, and then eventually I went to Bancroft, Ontario. And from Ontario, I then moved to Alberta in 1981. So from 1981 onward, I was involved with the Alberta Lacrosse Association, but I've also been involved with the Canadian Lacrosse Association for 15 years. Being married with 4 daughters, women were not part of the lacrosse program back in the 70s and so on in the areas that we lived in. And some of the areas we lived in were somewhat remote, so lacrosse was not even part of the program, although I ended up developing the program, but it was primarily for boys. But today, at this day and age, we have 8 grandkids, and every one of them are in some way part of the lacrosse program. My dad's name was Daniel, and in 1959, he started the lacrosse program in Cornwall. And what happened was there was no lacrosse whatsoever, and I remember one day he came to me, as clear as we're sitting here, and said, you know, that they're going to start the sport of lacrosse because of the native tradition across in Cornwall Island and so on, and would you like to play? And of course, my dad was involved with hockey as the president, and they asked him to be the president of lacrosse. Well, my dad and I were very close in regards to sports, so I said, well, sure, I'll play lacrosse, whatever that was, because I really didn't know much about the game. So in 1959, he started lacrosse, and I played up until 1965, whenever I couldn't play anymore because there was no league in that particular area. And I started refereeing in 1962. And then in 1962 and 1965, whenever I couldn't play anymore, I went full-time refereeing, and I've refereed for 53 years. Whenever I was in Cornwall, I worked for Domtar Fine Papers, and I was a lab technician for the research department. And then I left Domtar in 1972 to 1981. I joined the Ontario Provincial Police, and I lived in a place called Bancroft, Ontario, northeast of Peterborough, the lacrosse hub. And from there, I was there till 1981. And then in 1981, I moved to Alberta with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So I've been involved with policing for 36 years in total. I started refereeing in 1962, and from there I ended up being refereeing chief for the area of Cornwall. And then eventually, whenever they had the EOLA, Eastern Ontario Lacrosse Association, which was sort of severed from the Oshawa, Toronto area, I was president of the Referees Association back then in the Cornwall area, Cornwall, Ottawa, and Morrisburg, and so on. So from there, I refereed, and I left in 1972. I went to Bancroft, and in Bancroft, there was no lacrosse at all. So based on, I met a guy who had played lacrosse before, and as well as I did, and we started lacrosse in Bancroft, Ontario, and of course, somebody's got to be the president, so I was the president of the Bancroft Lacrosse Association. I left Ontario and went to Alberta, and I lived in Cardston, Alberta, down in the southern part of Alberta. And there was virtually no lacrosse at all down there, but I did participate a little bit with lacrosse in Lethbridge. And eventually in 1970 or 1986, I moved up to Fort Saskatchewan, where I presently live today. So whenever I moved up, a group of us who were refereeing in the particular lacrosse league all met out at the Bill Hunter rink, and Mark Asbell said, let's start a referees association. And so we started the Lacrosse Association. Mark was the referee-in-chief, or the president of the Referees Association, for a couple of years. And then from there he says, it's time for me to step down. We want you to step up and take over. He said, there's really nothing to do. It's just a name and a position. Well, I quickly learned that that wasn't the case. There was an awful lot of work and an awful lot of development and so on. So I worked very diligently with the Alberta Lacrosse Association, and we developed a lot of the training programs and so on. And then from there, I was involved with the Fort Saskatchewan Lacrosse as a coach. And from there, I was coaching, I coached Bantam and also midget with my grandkids, some of my grandkids at that age. And from there, I've been refereeing ever since. So up till just a couple of years ago is whenever I figured I've done enough. My target was 50 years, and I did 53 years. So I think I exceeded my expectation. But I have been coaching senior women for 5 years in box lacrosse, which was a fantastic experience for me teaching girls. I should say ladies, because of their age and so on. We had ladies who had children and young girls who just happened to be over the age of 20, who were, some have never had a lacrosse stick in their hands, and that was really exciting because you take someone and you develop them the way you want and the way I was taught. So I did that for 5 years, and the last 2 years I've been coaching junior women because now my granddaughter, my oldest granddaughter, is now involved. And I have to tell you a quick story about our granddaughter. Finley Stelmack is her name, and what happened was that she was involved, and she's in high school, she's now waiting to go to college or university, and she had tried basketball, she had tried badminton, she tried every sport, every instrument you could ever imagine, and it never ever worked out. Gave her a taste of lacrosse, and she has been hooked ever since, and she just loves the sport. There's something about the sport, I guess the energy that you put out, the frustration that you can relieve and so on, but she just loves the sport, and that which keeps me and my wife very involved with lacrosse, because now we have our grandkids are all playing. And out of our 8 grandkids, all of them are in one way or another are involved with the sport of lacrosse. With being president of the Referees Association, I got involved with the Canadian Lacrosse Association. I spent 15 years with the Canadian Lacrosse, and I was referee in chief for Canada for 8 years, and in charge of the high performance program for another 7 years. So I've been all over Canada. I've actually, because of the lacrosse program, I've been all over the world. I have to say I'm the most fortunate person whenever it comes to the sport of lacrosse, to be able to travel and meet people. And we're just getting ready now to go down to Alabama, and we're going to be down there. And I know people down there who are involved with lacrosse. So we can travel the world. I came back from Vietnam last year, stopped in Japan, and they picked me up and they toured me all over the city and so on. So lacrosse has been my golden nugget, I have to say, whenever it comes to the sport of lacrosse and the capabilities or the availability of doing different things across the world. I brought some photographs of the teams from way back when, and whenever I look at it, I look at the number of players who had played back then for the minors, and also who are still this day and age still coaching. Just a few weeks ago, I met with a group of guys in Edmonton along with Jim Burke, and we met up with the guys who were at the first Canada Games in Halifax in 1969. And to see those people and say, oh, I knew you, or I know you, and I didn't realize that you were involved in the Canada Games, in which I was there officiating. Well, I have to say, I was very fortunate whenever I worked for Domtar Fine Papers. I managed to work my way up to be a power engineer, a third-class power engineer, which was a real feather because back then you had to write government exams, so you had to really study hard. And while I was working, I was studying, and I managed to do that. But then I left and joined the Ontario Provincial Police, and then eventually the RCMP. With policing, I was pretty much influenced by a lot of the policemen who were involved with lacrosse in Cornwall, who stopped by the house and periodically would be there in their uniform and with their police cars and so on. Of course, I was just a little kid back then. So I certainly enjoyed all that, and working in Domtar, where you have a lot of strong odors and gases and so on, and some dangerous situations where people are actually killed in the industry. My dad said, do you really want to stay in industry, or should you be out in the fresh air and so on? Not, with him not realizing really what police work's all about. But anyway, he sold it to me that I would certainly enjoy being a policeman. So as I say, I spent 36 years as a policeman, but the achievements I've made as a policeman are absolutely fantastic. I have to say I'm quite proud of myself with the way I deal with people and treat people the way I want to be treated. So in my last career, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, some of the work I did was with the witness protection program. And I have to say I have a number of, I'll use the word trophies, of people who have been really mixed up in regards to homicides or drugs or whatever the case may be, and have turned their lifestyle around and are absolutely outstanding citizens of today. So my work with the public has always been my feather in my cap, or my badge, my golden badge, to say that I know I've done a good job. In 1959, whenever they decided to start lacrosse, it was somewhat coming on to the spring, so it was kind of put together pretty quick. So the issue is, okay, we're going to play lacrosse. Well, we know we're going to get lacrosse sticks across on Cornwall Island. And so my first lacrosse stick, I purchased a stick for 75 cents, and to have it strung was another 50 cents, so $1.25. And back then, that was reasonable. That was a really good price, but you know, affordable that we could flood the market with real lacrosse sticks. So we came in, we had to have a place to play, and we played at the 7th Street Park in Cornwall. And it was an old hockey box, and we had to repair the box and fix the wire on the end and so on. And the lines of the crease and the face-off circles were all made of lime. So you had to be careful if you had a cut on your knees and so on, which is very common, and you get lime in it, you're going to have to flood it with water. And so that was the playing area, and we played 4 15-minute periods back then, as compared to 3 20s as we play now. So the game started to evolve, and of course now we have the issue of equipment. So the most important person out there who's going to get whacked is the goalie. So what does he wear? So what they did was they allowed him to wear steel-toe boots, construction boots, and they went and they got shin pads from baseball. And that's what the goaltender wore. But the trouble with the baseball shin pads was any hard shots were busting up the shin pads. So it was, you know, he tried to use his lacrosse stick as much as possible. The belly pad was a belly pad that an umpire would wear in a ball game. And then he wore for gloves, he wore hockey gloves. And for the trapper was a hockey trapper is what he used. So, and with that, back then, he had a helmet with a face mask, and some of them actually had a football helmet with a face mask that they used to get started. No such thing as a throat guard or whatever. So us as players, we used all of our hockey gear as much as we possibly could. We used soccer knee pads, so we wouldn't scrape up our knees on the cinders and so on. And we wore a leather helmet that covered the front of your skull and the back of your skull, but not the top of your head. And of course, then we had our hockey gloves, which were big and cumbersome and so on, but everybody was the same, so that was good. So we started out the league with 3 teams. We had the Red Devils, the Blue Devils, and the Sabercats. And of course, the question was, I was on the Blue Devils, well, why are we called Devils and they're called Sabercats? Because that was a more, I'll say, a more nicer name, because we were Devils and these guys were Sabercats. Well, the coach of the Sabercats, Norm McCrimmon, he had a Buick LeSabre, and that's why they get it. And of course, they had nicer sweaters. We had red and blue, and they had a decal on the front of their sweaters. So it was quite upsetting for some of us at the very beginning. And of course, whenever it came to starting off, the Sabercats had really the better team. And I don't know whether it was draws or whatever, but they formed the teams, but they had a pretty good team. So after a few years, well, things did change. And there was no way that they're going to be winning every year or winning every game. So we did a few things to make sure that we won the odd game now and then. And of course, from there, lacrosse in Cornwall evolved and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then a number of years ago, lacrosse kind of died out, and now it's back in again, and it's very strong in Cornwall, Ontario. No, I knew Newsy Lalone. I met him way back when, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What was he like?
Oh, he was really a gentleman, quiet and very approachable. He was just a kind of a guy that was part of the community. He was just another guy, part of the community. But it wasn't until later on, whenever he got his recognition, that people started saying, oh, I know Newsy Lalone. And he was a great guy, and he was a great guy. But no, a very, very interesting individual. I was the lead person for the World Championships in Langley, and I had a lot of time to mill with the people part of the World Lacrosse, who used to be the Federation of International Lacrosse. And based on my experience with them and learning more and more, it's really difficult to say. I know lacrosse has had a very difficult time getting sponsorship and that exposure and so on. But if in fact lacrosse has gone through the steps with the World Lacrosse Association organizations and so on to get to that level, that they're expecting that lacrosse will be in the 2028 Olympics. Having said that, they're hoping for. Now, having said that, if in fact it does, then the money is going to flow for the development and the exposure, more of the exposure and the development in that order, to get lacrosse going. Lacrosse is, in my opinion, is a fantastic sport. The conditioning and the skill, the eye contact, the roughness and toughness and so on, it's a fantastic game. It's just that we can't seem to get that exposure to a lot of the different communities across Canada or the world. Now, in the world, lacrosse is being developed primarily in the field program, and the field program, and in the women's also, the women's program, that eventually I can see it going back into the Olympics. If it goes back into the Olympics, the doors are going to open, and I can see lacrosse expanding even more than what it has to date. So I'm really hoping that everybody does their homework and crosses their fingers to get that back into the Olympics. Yes, I was. What happened was I was refereeing in Cornwall, and my dad first of all called me and said that they're looking for someone to go to the Canada Games in Halifax. Would I be interested? And at that time I was working at Domtar, and I approached the company and said like I'd be interested in going and so on. Of course, it was good exposure for the company. And yeah, I went to Halifax as a referee, and this is where I mentioned earlier about meeting a bunch of the guys in Edmonton a few weeks ago who were in that first Canada Games. So it was quite exciting, and I can remember it as clear as we were sitting here, the fun that I had and the meeting the people and the exposure of the first Canada Summer Games, of which I was a referee. So it was a fantastic experience. Yeah, I've officiated at every level. I haven't done the, I shouldn't say I haven't done the Mann Cup, because I did in 1969, I believe it was. But yeah, I've been the convener at, actually this morning I did my edition, and I've been convener for 13 national championships across Canada. The camaraderie of meeting people and going back, and I'll reflect on, I was in Ganawagi here last year for the President's Cup. And to go back there and see a lot of the people I've met from years past, and even some of the players that come up and, you know, give you a hug and ask you how you're doing, how's life, and how's the family, and so on. That's one of the biggest enjoyments that I have, is meeting up with people to just enjoy that camaraderie that we have in the lacrosse family. And they go out and they rough and tough, and sure, they may be the odd fight here and there and so on. But at the end of the day, everybody's a really good friend of each other. And that's one of the biggest payoffs that I have in regards to being a convener for the National Championship. Yeah, my assessing started back in Cornwall whenever I was there. And from there we moved up to Bancroft. And then once I'm out west in Alberta, I've done a tremendous number of assessments on officials. And the enjoyment is, and what we started in Alberta was a third official on the floor, where we have 2 junior referees and you go out on the floor as a senior referee. And at first I was a little bit opposed to that. First of all, thinking about the cost of the teams and so on. But at the end, that was a great payoff. And today we still have referees that I did assessing on and coached them through that are still officiating and have gone to national championships. So again, there's a great payoff to be able to do that with these young guys who are now older and maybe married and so on, but are still involved with the sport of lacrosse. Oh, I'm telling you, to get those awards was absolutely fantastic. You know, to have that recognition for the work that you've done, not thinking about the recognition, but to even be identified and you know, even to get a call from Jim to say that, hey, we want you to come up and do this interview was very exciting and very touching. So yeah, I'm quite proud of that, and that trophy that's sitting in the background, the James McFall, I have it proudly on my computer desk along with all my lacrosse memorabilia on the walls and so on. And with the Lester B. Pearson Award, I was quite honored by that, and of course, you know, to see the names that are on that trophy and to be part of that class is certainly quite an honor, quite an honor. Restorative justice is a program that goes on in Alberta, and what it is that if we have young people who are involved with some form of criminal activity, and what we do is based on, rather than taking these people to court and having a criminal conviction, what we try to do is we bring them before this committee, we discuss the situation, we ask the individual about their part or their role and so on, and what they could have done better, and did they do right or do wrong, and so on. And at the end, the recommendation is made that rather than having them go to a criminal court and have a criminal conviction as a young offender, what we would do is we would give them a task to do, whether it be working with, I'll say, the Boys and Girls Club, or shoveling snow for seniors, or doing something. And then once they're done with that task, they come back to us, and again we review what the situation was and how they feel about themselves, and what other programs that we can put them in or help them put themselves in that would make them better citizens. And it's been a very successful program, certainly here in Alberta. In 1968, the lacrosse factory in Cornwall Island burnt overnight. It started around 2 o'clock in the morning, and they really weren't sure whether it was wiring or whatever the case was, but anyway, the factory burnt down. And at that time, my dad was still the president of lacrosse, and the situation was that, okay, we're developing lacrosse in Cornwall, we're getting bigger and bigger, where are we going to get a supply of lacrosse sticks? And back then, there wasn't many manufacturers of the wooden lacrosse stick, the real lacrosse stick. So the issue was that there was some people, and I can't remember if it was in Toronto area or whatever, were trying to introduce the plastic or the Tupperware sticks. And they tried to introduce it. Few people came out with a few of them, and it kind of died off. It was a dead issue because everybody wanted a real lacrosse stick. And so eventually what the Cornwall Island Mohawk people did was they got the factory going again, and they continued to produce lacrosse sticks. But it was pretty devastating, and I remember Colin Chisholm, who is the manager of the program of the lacrosse manufacturing. He was teaching as well as running the lacrosse factory, and he lived right behind us in Cornwall. And I can remember the day that it happened, and the look on his face, and the devastation of the people that were over there, because we're just across the road from Cornwall Island, so our access was pretty common for us to go over there, or them to go over our place. So it was very devastating, and of course everybody pulled together. The lacrosse family came together, and got that factory going again. And now today there's lots of I shouldn't say lots. There's a number of producers of the wooden lacrosse stick, and I think of Mark Mitchell being one of the main producers. And yeah, Mohawk lacrosse. And I still have my original Mohawk lacrosse professional lacrosse sticks hanging on my wall by my desk. And eventually the Tupperware sticks, as we call them, managed to get its way into the lacrosse program. And there's a lot of lacrosse sticks today that are the Tupperware, but there's still the odd individual who's still using the traditional lacrosse stick. What happened with the officiating committee, I was asked if I would be the head official for Canada, and this was sort of developing the NOCP, the National Officials Certification Program. So I managed to get a group of people from the different provinces, one person from each of the provinces, to come in, and we formed this committee, and we had to review what in fact was there and what was not there. Well, what was not there was a lot, and what was there was pretty dated. So what we did was we developed a national officials program. so that we developed the program that would be sent to all the provinces, and they would be able to take that training program through projectors and so on onto a screen, and everybody was to have the same program whenever it came to training officials. And then from there, we would expect that the officials, the head officials in those provinces, would designate someone who would be doing there to do assessments to make sure that there's consistency. So it took about 3 years to get that really rolling well, and then we started to fine tune it, and things turned out really, really well. The unfortunate thing is that with the officiating program, we have the rule book, but the rule book, some provinces modify it or add rules to it that changes the concept of what the rule interpretation is. So it was a bit of a clash between us developing the program and some of the provinces. But overall, whenever it came to a national championship, we followed the rules of play of the Canadian Lacrosse Association. So we did that, and we did recognition programs for our officials across Canada, and we really did a tremendous amount of work. We would have our guys, or our team, and we had some ladies also, who would show up on a Friday night, and we would work Saturday morning till about 6 o'clock in the morning, and come 10:30, 11 o'clock, we were back at it, and then come Sunday, we would fly home. So they knew it wasn't a vacation. They all knew that we were there to develop the program, and we did a tremendous job. So it took a lot of work. We had John Hurd, who is the god of the rule book. He knows the rules inside out. He can tell you the page numbers. He can tell you, well, if we change this rule, it'll affect another rule, and so on. So I had really, really good people involved whenever it came to developing the rules of play. So I was quite lucky, or I should say, we, the Canadian Lacrosse Association and the provinces, were quite lucky to have such valuable people that I did have on the committee. And people who were there thinking that it was a bit of a holiday. It wasn't hard to weed them out, and they realized that we were there to work, and we were, there's expenses. And expenses, the money from expenses comes from kids registering. So I got my money's worth out of these people, and at the end of the day, and then from there I did that for 8 years, and then we turned it over to to Brent McCauley. And Brent McCauley was on the team at that time too. And Brent knew how we worked and what we could do to develop, and he also fine-tuned things and so on. So it just continued on, and it's still a very strong program, very strong program. In 1969 with the Canada Games, and later on whenever we had the World Lacrosse Championships in Halifax and so on, the issue of getting referees to go to national championships or to world competition, because the Federation of International Lacrosse was developing all over the world. So in order to get people to go, well, first of all, if they're employed, who's going to, can they get time off of work? And that was a big concern. And if they could get time off of work, then they're going to have to spend, a few $1,000s to go and referee a sport that they love. But the thing is that it's going to be a few $1,000s out of their pocket. So at that time, I think we were paying $3 along with the players, $2 or $3 for registration. And I thought, something, the only way we can get officials to go to national championships and world competitions and develop our program across Canada would be to have that experience of going to these events. So what we decided was that we're going to raise it to $10. And we raised it from $3 or $2 to $10, which then we started putting the money into a pool. So whenever it came to national championships, we had X number of dollars that we could, I'll say $500, that we could give to you to fly from, I'll say BC to Ontario or Nova Scotia to Ontario, whatever the case is, and help cover those costs. So as time went on and costs started going up and so on, what we decided was we're going to change this again. We're going to change this to $25. So we changed it to $25. Now we have a nice pool. Whenever it goes to national championships, whether it be the men's field, the women's field, or the box program, we have enough funds that are available that we can use those funds to help support the referees that are going to these competitions. And it takes that pressure off of guys and gals that they're able to attend. We have, we have a good pool of people now who are always willing to attend. So that was one of the really good accomplishments that we put together. Well, boy, that's a bit of an emotional question. The reason why I say that is that we as Canadians are exceptionally well received anywhere in the world, anywhere in the world. My wife and I, we backpacked all over the world with our Canada backpacks and so on, and everybody's asking us for our patch on the back because they want to be Canadians because of the reception that we get. No different than whenever we travel with our national teams. We traveled to, and I'll use the example of Manchester with our men's field team. That was my first experience with the national team program. And we're there, and we know we have a good team, and so does the United States, and England's coming on, and Australia's coming on, and all these different countries and so on. But whenever it came to Canada, teams were approaching us and asking, let me back up. Teams were being offered the opportunity of using our people to do a training program. And our guys willingly volunteered to help work with these different countries. So I still remember today waking up one morning, I think it was about 6:30 in the morning, and I could hear Jeff Snyder outside the window of the dorm that we were staying in. And I'm thinking, 6:30 in the morning, what is Jeff doing at this time in the morning? And here he is outside with a team from Japan, he and a couple of other lads, and they're doing repetition drills and so on to help them improve because they wanted them to improve at the Manchester Games. So things like that are just so exciting, and it makes me so proud that I know these guys and I know Team Canada whenever it comes to the men's program. With the women's program, I was never exposed to the field program as I was with the women's program. Whenever we were in Amsterdam with the women's program, that was my first real good exposure to the women's program. And to see these young ladies, and it was the young ladies that were playing, to see these ladies with the skill that they have with that lacrosse stick, with no pocket as compared to the men's program, was just fantastic, unbelievable, the skill that they had. And again, our team, Team Canada, put on clinics for the different countries and so on, voluntarily wanted to do this and help develop the lacrosse program. These guys and these girls, whenever they go to national championships or world championships later on, it's all a friendship thing. They get together, oh, I remember you and you did this for us and we did this for you. Next thing you know, they're swapping patches or doing different things and swapping jerseys at the very end and so on. It's just an absolutely fantastic experience. It just blew my mind about how proud I was of our Canadian people. We were doing the President's Cup in Edmonton, and what happened was I was in charge of the referees, and we were staying at this one hotel, the Holiday Inn, and in that particular area where the Holiday Inn was, it was always a bit of a rough area. And I knew Edmonton because of my background, and I knew it was a rough area, but having said that, this is where they wanted to put us, and they gave me this suite with a big tub and all that kind of stuff, but downstairs below me was the bar. And in Edmonton, what happened is that every night, next thing you know, you hear the sirens and you hear the fire trucks and so on. And what it is that somebody is drunk and falling down, and they come and they pick them up and they take them away, and away they go. Well, this one particular night, I heard this siren going off, and heard the noise, and I thought, oh, here's another drunken individual, and the ambulance is there and so on. But I kept seeing the flashing light go around in my window, and I thought, how long is this going to go on? Like, how bad is this person, he really fallen down and hurt himself? So anyway, I got up and I went over and looked, and gee, there was a fire truck there. And they had the ladder coming up to a window, just a few windows down from my room. And I thought, well, this can't be a drunk on the road or on the sidewalk. This must be a fire. So I opened up my door, and gee, the hall was like a morgue. It was absolutely, you could hear yourself breathe. It was that quiet. And the entire hall was white. And I thought, oh my gosh. And in the hallway was an alarm system, but what happened was that the armature that hits the bell was so close, it was like a woodpecker. So it wasn't really an alarm, it was just some woodpecker hitting on the wall. Oh my gosh, there is a fire here. So I quickly grabbed my stuff, and I had some work stuff that I was trying to keep on top of my job too. And I grabbed all my stuff and got dressed, and I went to the one exit door to come downstairs, and I opened up the door, and the door, I couldn't see the first step. It was that bad. It was that white. And you got to be calm and think about it and so on. I yelled down the hallway to make sure people were out and heard nothing whatsoever. And I thought, okay, if it's that bad here, I'm going to try the other door. So I went to the back door and it was gray. But I thought, you know something? If it's gray here, down below, because smoke rises, it should be okay. So I had to come down 3 flights of stairs, and I carrying my work computer and all my documents and so on from work. And I get out the door, and of course, I'm just waiting for air. Like, I need that fresh air. I open up the door, and there's all of my team, referee team, standing there, cheering and so on, and all the crowd is cheering. And they said, "We told you there was still one guy in the building," and that was me. But I managed to get out, and anyway, we had a great series and had a lot of fun, but we had a lot of laughs. The guys had a lot of laughs over what had taken place. And of course, then we moved to my place, and some of the guys stayed at my house, which was a distance away, but we put everybody up and we had a fantastic time. But that was quite an experience that I went through. And whenever it comes to hotels, I always check what floor I'm on, where the exits are, and make sure I can get out.